All right. Well, very good afternoon to all of you, those who are joining us and watching this broadcast of my one-to-one with the Chief Constable. This forms part of my accountability role with the Chief Constable, and we have regular catch-ups throughout the week. And not all of these are recorded for obvious reasons. But the one that I choose to record and put in the public domain are mostly based. The question that I'm going to be asking the chief would largely be based on questions that you've sent in to me, either via email or that I've seen on social media that you want me to raise with the police force, and also some that I have picked up from the Performance and Accountability Board, which is chaired by the chief executive in my office, in partnership with the police force as well. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Festus Akimbuso, and I am the Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire. And Trevor, do you want to introduce yourself for those who do not know you yet?
Yeah, season's greetings to you, Commissioner, and to all those people watching. Trevor Rodenhurst, Chief Constable of Bedfordshire.
And Trevor, obviously, just to start off, really good, impactful episodes recently of 24 Hours in Police Custody, which I know many people do watch, and I think it's probably one of the most watched documentaries on Channel 4. Now, the last two episodes have pretty much focused around sexual violence and some of the immense amount of work being done by victim engagement officers and some of the teams in our Razzle the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences team. I mean, how are you expecting this to play out in terms of more people coming forward to report this? And what do you want to just say to anyone who's been a victim of sexual violence, even if it's a historical one, to come forward and report, and how would the force deal with that?
Yeah, so if I may, Commissioner, I'll probably start by just saying, firstly, a big thank you to the victims who featured in those series. It's a great, bit of courage that they had to allow us to work with them in a way that was able to make those documentaries. And also a big well done to all of my staff who featured in those. I think you would agree they, came across as extremely professional, compassionate, and absolutely doing their best for those individuals who are victims or survivors, indeed, of those offences. And I'm pleased that the public got to see how much effort goes into those investigations and how professional the staff are. As you say, we do, in addition to those who are doing the investigations, we have specialist victim engagement officers, who kind of stay in regular contact and help individuals who've been victims of those sorts of crimes to kind of, to go through that process at what is a very difficult time in their lives to ensure they get the right support. We obviously, often programs of that nature will kind of, because they do raise confidence in policing and in Bedfordshire Police, we anticipate that we may see more people come forwards, and therefore we cater for that and have resources identified and prepared to kind of take any additional calls of that nature, so that they can be really effectively, dealt with from the outset. So that's certainly what we've done over the last couple of weeks. And what I would say, Commissioner, is I've had emails from various people, including from the wider police family, saying how impressed they were by what they saw on the last two episodes.
And I think it's just worthwhile informing the public that there are consequences for the investment that they support me in making into the force, because we, as part of the budget for 23-24, I believe, we're going to recruit, as I say, 4 additional VEOs, victim engagement officers, to go into this rape team. And it's just really good to see how, I take it that we now have all those 4 in place.
Yeah, so in the last, the current year, you supported us to effectively increase the recruitment. And in fact, what we ended up, we had some people on kind of temporary arrangements, and we were able to make them permanent.
Right, permanent, right.
Great, because we've kept those skills and experience in our organisation. So
and it just gives some stability to the team as well, right? Rather than having, will they be here? Will they not be here? And they're worth their weight in gold.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's and the other thing I would say, just as an aside, is it's an additional pressure being filmed when you're doing your job, and a difficult job, but nevertheless, that what I saw gave I think was a huge credit to the individuals involved, but hopefully gave a confidence to people watching that in terms of how Bedfordshire Police approach investigations of that nature.
Yeah, and I just want to thank residents for approving that precept increase last year. It does have real life consequences, and I'm just glad that on this occasion a small aspect of that was able to be captured on 24 hours in custody. So that's really good. Now, the next question that I want to ask you is around the police funding settlement, which was announced last week for 2024-25. This settlement will see Bedfordshire Police overall allocation increase by 7%, which is above the national average. So that's quite a positive sign. It doesn't mean that funding formula has been resolved. It just means that we've got a good increase in our budget. Can you just confirm where this settlement from last week leaves the police force in terms of its finances, delivering on our agreed policing priorities, and what residents say they actually want from their police force?
Yeah, well, I can give indicative, because all of the funding settlement in its totality is not yet complete, because we haven't had notification of things like our special grants that we get. But you're right, we did get a 7% increase against a national average of 6%, and that's essentially baked some additional numbers that we took above our kind of original target into the baseline of our force, which is good. Nevertheless, and I make no even on the assumption, Commissioner, that you were to increase the precept by a maximum of £13, and I say that's just an assumption, but based on that, we still have a financial gap to stand still for next year. It's probably slightly less of a gap than it could have been if that settlement was less favourable. But nevertheless, it's still in the magnitude of around £1.5 million that needs to be found so that we can stand still. And obviously, there's things that I want to do, and I know you want to support me to do more. And if we're going to reinvest, I need to find even more than that within the organisation to do that. Obviously, we will wait the outcome of the special grant, because there's in the region of £9 million that we get from special grant, and we have not had the notification of what we're due to get. So that could become a more challenging situation, depending on that. But that's thereabouts where we are, which is again, pretty much in line with what we were planning towards. So there isn't any shocks in there at the moment. We've been going through a process of priority-based budgeting. We know roughly where we are. We'll look to indicatively draw the line on that this week, and then in the formal governance board that you and I will be going to later in the week, we'll present you with a bit more detail at that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the special grant, just so you know, and the listeners know, that I today wrote a letter to the policing minister about the absolute necessity of the special grant pending the funding formula being reviewed and decided. And I've worked with Phil Wells, the CFO, on this, and so again the numbers in place. Now, I'm mindful that with the announcement last week, there was a top slicing of some of the non-core budgets, as it were, of which a special grant is a part of that. And obviously you were in that meeting with the policing minister where I asked him about this, and I was assured that some of that top slicing mostly is to account for other police operations. So I am hoping that with the lobbying that you are making and that I'm making of him, we are not going to see too drastic a reduction in our special grant. But I'm hopeful that we can keep a good chunk of that for the next financial year. Because otherwise, I mean, what would be the implications of that potentially for the force?
Well, the special grant enables us to put an enhanced capability in place to tackle the challenge of, from guns crime and gang crime. And we do have challenges in that area. It also enables us to put an enhancement in place in relation to serious organised crime, and in particular the crime that emanated from the kind of encrypted comms operation that happened, known nationally as Operation Venetic, was in the
Yeah.
papers, public.
Mhm.
That identified some serious risks within Bedfordshire, and we had good capabilities that were supported to help us tackle serious and organised crime, and as I'd already said, serious violence in the form of gun and gang crime. So we have particular capabilities, and they do really important work in suppressing that threat and tackling that threat of serious and organised crime and serious violence involving weapons, which leads to obviously homicides and other crimes. So it's really important for this force to maintain those capabilities.
Chief, just before we move on to the next question, I have an ask to make of you. Obviously, for you to consider with the comms team, you mentioned about the suppression activities that the force is having, and these are things because they're suppressed that do not actually materialize. In other words, the public will not get to see the outcome because often the public get to see um, cases or hear cases when someone has been shot or stabbed, where a fatality has occurred. They get to hear about those things, but the public don't always get to see the stuff that were prevented from happening because of the operations of your officers. And I think it will be a huge boost to public confidence if the public were made more aware of these activities. Obviously, after they've been done, you don't want to compromise any investigation or policing operations. Is there more that you think can be done by the force to keep the public informed on a regular basis of these kind of activities that prevent um, things from happening? And I've been in touch with David Ode as well, maybe in terms of just updating the public in terms of maybe on a monthly basis the amount of, say, for example, drink drivers that were arrested, because that has prevented someone from potentially being killed. The amount of firearms that were seized in a quarter. We can have this very simple, easily shareable infographics. I think that would just let people know that there's an awful lot that your officers do that they would thankfully never get to see materialize in broad daylight. Can you just take that on board and see what you can do, please?
I can. Hopefully, you've seen, and people watching this have seen more and more come on our social media channels, particularly like Instagram, where we often use that to show the good outcomes we're doing from kind of proactive police work. Obviously, a lot of our effort, Commissioner, through our community teams and working alongside other important capabilities such as the Vero, is actually aimed at identifying those kind of risks and diverting people, particularly young people, at a much earlier stage. So that's an equally important story, and I know again we do a lot to promote that work, but I think that is the key, rather than exclusively focusing on enforcement. But nevertheless, where these serious crimes are happening, we will do it, and we have a good story to tell on that. So I take on board your request, and I'm supportive that our comms team do as much as they can to tell these stories. But indeed, we talked about 24 hours in police custody earlier.
That is part of it.
That focused on some serious sexual offending, as you've seen in the last couple of weeks. But I know that in the new year it will move into some of those areas. So that'll be pretty much on a national stage promoting the work that happens here. And there are not, as you say, it's not one of the most, it is the most watched documentary on Channel 4, which is something the force, is going to continue to support because of the story it tells to the public. But I do, I accept that isn't the only answer. There's always more we can do in terms of promoting that.
Thank you. And kind of moving on to the second question. I've had a number of inquiries from residents, especially in our rural areas, about the issuing and the renewal of gun licenses.
Yeah.
Can you just give me an idea of what is the cause of these delays, and what is being done to improve the processing time of these of the applications?
Yeah. Yes, so there are some delays. We have a collaborated firearms licensing capability with Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire. It makes more sense to do a specialist capability in that way. However, I've looked at the performance on this recently, and nationally our delays are at the lower end of the scale compared to many other places, and are continuing to improve. And the reason for this is there was the very tragic case in Plymouth. The coroner issued, rightly so, a Section 28 notice for forces to improve in this area, and therefore we've moved from one which was possibly an admin focused kind of area to a much more investigative focus, rightly so. And so we are revoking licenses and refusing licenses at numbers higher than we've ever done before. And in order to do that properly, we have to, put investigation and effort into them. However, we are getting through the backlog. There's about a 3-month delay in issuing those, and I know that could be frustrating for people, but part of those delays are because people aren't getting all the information they need. So they need to get their medical declaration signed by their GP. They need to have their ACRO check return done, because we're managing it across those three forces in the region of 7,000 renewals alongside new applications. Yeah. And to give you a sense of it, we in 2020, 2021, I think we refused or revoked less than 10 licenses and refused kind of 3 applications so far. And this year, even in the first 2 quarters, we revoked 55 licenses and refused 28 applications. But the work in terms of those, because there's an appeal process to the Crown Court, is extensive. So those are the reasons. We've got 19 appeals currently live, albeit we've not lost one yet. So that shows you that we're doing this thoroughly and correctly. But the aim is to bring the delays down, but we also ask the public are really, timely with their own applications to minimize that from their side.
Right, because I had some information provided to me, which suggests that in Hart and Cambs, their delay period was a lot less than ours. But this was probably data from 2021 though, so it's not as current. But obviously that was pre the situation in Devon and Cornwall, police in the area. So I would imagine there is a national delay at the moment, but it's just that people I've had quite a number of those in that work in that sector in our rural areas, express a lot of frustration as to how long it takes to get the process resolved. Now, just lastly on this, you said a lot of the challenges seem to emanate from people not having all the information necessary to get the application processed, and that is what's causing the delay. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there's obligations on the applicant to submit their applications in a timely way. They need medical information, etc., in there.
And this is not happening.
And it's got to be signed by the GP and all those things. So you can foresee if that isn't done at the earliest opportunity and really done promptly, then that itself can build in a delay into the system. So I just ask that people are mindful of that and are really prompt with providing all the information they're required to do in a timely way. Otherwise, it'll inevitably cause delay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I shall feed that back. A third question is around the Chrysalis Center. I was on Three Counties Radio a couple of days ago, just talking about the Chrysalis program, the impact that it is having on the creation of more and more victims for domestic abuse in our area. For those who do not know, the Chrysalis program is an intense, targeted, and focused intervention program aimed at making sure that the perpetrators of domestic abuse take responsibility of their actions. They are made aware. They're made aware of the wider implications of what they are doing, and also ultimately help them to make better choices. Because, in my view, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, Chief, is that if we want to, probably one of the best ways for us to prevent people from becoming a victim of domestic abuse is to prevent people from being domestic abusers in the first place.
100%. Again, we know that sometimes a lot of things happen behind closed doors before victims come forward. So, take this opportunity to say, please come forward. You will be believed, you'll be supported. But in terms of the offenders, so the Chrysalis Centre, this is providing effectively a new diversionary pathway, particularly for, maybe instances where this is coming to light for the first time, or there might not be foreseen, there might be evidential challenges with this progressing, but nevertheless, there's a behaviour that's identified that an opportunity can be presented to a suspect who consents to go on diversionary programme and get help to stop this. And actually, I think it's got real potential to reduce this type of offending and repeat offending. So we are really encouraging our teams to work and take advantage of that pathway. It does require, consent on the suspect's behalf, but nevertheless, there are people out there who recognise the behaviour is wrong and they want to actually seek self-help and change, and this is a way of doing that.
I'm actually, speaking of that, I was looking at the reports from the leads for the program last week, and the program started in September. The number of referrals were very minimal, and then it increased marginally in October, and then in November, of the 82 total referrals since September, 50 of those 82 came in the month of November. A huge increase. And what I thought was really impressive as well was that with the number of self-referrals, which is really, really healthy. And contrary to some what some people might have thought, that this would be a overwhelming majority men, I think about 40% of the referrals are women. So it's really good to see the progress of this. I would just like to make sure that we're getting as many referrals from Bedfordshire police officers into the Chrysalis Centre as possible, because the £2 million that we've got for this is a significant amount of investment, and the level of intervention available is really, really thorough, and it supports both children who are perpetrators of DA to their parents, as well as parents to children, as well as partners as well. So it's quite an all-encompassing program. So it's really helpful there. Moving on to the next question, Chief. I had someone come to me, having seen our previous recording around the use of out-of-court disposals and in relation to knife possession. So they want to know, can the Chief Constable please clarify the force policy on use of out-of-court disposal for possession of knives? Under what circumstances can out-of-court disposals be applicable?
Yeah, I will answer that question. I guess what I would like to start off by saying is the out-of-court resolutions that we currently, that pathway that we have in place is really effective at diverting people who've committed offences, get conditional caution, then go on a diversionary pathway where they have to attend a number of really professional sessions that help them, in terms of diversion and prevent them going on to reoffend. So first and foremost, that's a really effective tool for us. I want us to be using it more. It gives victims of crime immediate answers in terms of what the outcome was. It doesn't clog up the court system unnecessarily, and particularly effective pathway for first-time offenders and young people. But in terms of the specific question about knives, and I've said before on this in this forum and in others, knife crime, is really serious. It has really serious consequences. If you carry a knife, even if the mentality of doing so is for your own protection, that knife is likely to be used either on someone or on the individual carrying it. And we have a challenge with knife crime, and it's a priority for me and this force. However, I've dug into the detail of when we have used this in relation to knives, and to date there are 2 times that we've used it. And if I kind of give you a generalized summary of the nature of
2 times when you've used out of court resolutions where there's been a knife involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this, I'll give you a flavour of the circumstance, because rather than the process is, we have a matrix of a number of factors that make something suitable for an out-of-court disposal, and I'll explain why one of these was appropriate in that circumstance. So you've got a young person, a 14-year-old, I think, in a particular occasion, and I'll generalize so this doesn't identify anybody, who found in possession of a knife by their school. The school, I'm pleased to say, notified the police, and based on that person's history, their age, not having previous offending, they were put on an out-of-court disposal resolution where, as I understand it, that individual attended a number of sessions, engaged with them positively, has not gone on to commit any further offences, and has other improvements in their life, such as their improved attendance at school and those things. In those circumstances, that was probably a better outcome for that individual and the public, bearing in mind the knife hadn't been used but had been found on that individual and their age, etc. And I think that it may have been a better outcome for that individual than them being on bail to court for many, many months without any of the intervention I've described. So I'm not saying this is going to be regular in the use of knives, because you should expect, if you're carrying a knife, there's going to be a tough response and consequence. But nevertheless, that the use of out-of-court resolutions in appropriate circumstances should always be considered in all of the information available. And if, I'm sure you will agree with me, if we end up in a situation where we have people diverted away from crime, that is an outcome, that's right, and we're preventing crime in the long term by making the best use of these. But I suspect when it comes to the particular possession of knives, this is not going to be a regular thing. It's going to be few and far between, but it's not a mandatory. It can never be used for that, because in some circumstances, as in the one I've just described, I think it was appropriate.
So the question now, this makes me ask a couple of questions now. So who makes the decision? Who decides when it is appropriate and when it is not? And how is this decision-making process scrutinized for suitability? Because I just worry that given the amount of focus we are all giving to serious youth violence, and especially knife crime, in light of the tragic case we've seen in the last 24 months, for example, in Bedfordshire, overall, that an approach that suggests that you could face what the public might see as a slap on the wrist, you go to a couple of lessons, you say, I won't do it again, blah, 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 for carrying a knife, does not quite inspire the level of confidence. And I think, while I can't tell you or direct you as PCC on this kind of operational matter, I just want to be reassured, and I'm sure the residents will want to be reassured as well, that this is not a case of us saying to young people or anyone that if you carry a knife, you may not have to go to court. One. Second, that the decision-making process is being scrutinized for suitability, and the need for public confidence in the system is paramount in
Yeah.
this.
So
So this is also about the victim, not just the okay. There's no, you said there's no victim, but we don't want there to be a victim in the first place, right?
exactly that. The bit I would correct is there isn't just a couple of sessions. I think on this particular program there was 8 separate sessions that this young person had to engage with, and did so positively, and they're proper, real professional outsourced sessions, which is provided through your office. They, as I say, sadly, we have a number of people, every month that are found in possession of knives. And they, as I say, this is treated as a really serious crime by this force. And I've said to you, we've had 2 so far that have been suitable for this. In terms of the process itself, this isn't just an individual picks up a matrix and makes a determination. They have to go for an identified SPOC who makes sure that this is appropriate, and we have independent scrutiny of the use of out-of-court resolutions, which is supported by our Chief Superintendent for Crime and a judge from the Crown Court, and there's dip sampling of those to ensure that we all agree this is an appropriate use of this pathway. But I do think, on a personal note, and I'm not talking about possession of knives, I'm talking about other crimes, that we should be making the best use of this, because of the potential for first-time offenders to divert them from reoffending.
I think it's just good to be to reassure the public that this is not a standard business as usual thing. It is considered, and okay, that's right. I'm happy with that. Can we, if I can get some data from the scrutiny panel, in not necessarily now, just to see what they're getting, and what kind of crimes, what kind of offenses rather are coming to them for as part of the dip sampling, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
definitely have that, because I'm watching that data with interest, because I want us to make the best use
Yes.
of a pathway. That way, the stuff that needs to go to court goes to court, and the stuff that can be properly pursued in this direction can be done on the day. The pathway engaged with immediately, rather than waiting months and months for a court outcome. Because in terms of the case we discussed, had that have gone to court, I think, given the circumstance of the case, the age of the individual, they weren't unlikely to be going to prison. So it wasn't necessarily that was an easier outcome, because actually that needed to engage in those sessions immediately, rather than waiting for many, many months.
So at least I'm glad that a Crown Court judge is also included in the scrutiny panel as well, which is very helpful. Very good. Okay, moving on to the next question. So as part of my going around the county, I spend quite a bit of time in Bedford and Luton, but I also go in some of our far-flung communities that are bordering with neighboring policing areas as well, whether it's Northants or Cambridgeshire or Hertfordshire or TVP, Thames Valley Policing Area. There are some who have raised concerns about the response times to emergency calls from Bedfordshire Police. They feel that because they're so far removed from the main operational hubs in Luton and Bedford, that it takes quite a bit of time for emergency officers to get to them, to response officers. Does the force call on neighboring forces if an available resource is close to the resident because of their proximity to the border of that force? Say someone is in Woburn or then Asprey Guys, for example, they're right on the border of Milton Keynes. If there was a response officer from TVP who was literally across the road, and it was going to take a bit of time for an officer from Bedford, because that's part of the north hub, to get to them, will the force be able to call on neighboring police force to come in and deal with that case, or what is the what is the what do you do in that situation?
Well, firstly, the conversation, I'm pleased to, and we might get a chance to discuss this later, but the numbers of our officers who are fully operationally deployable is increasing. Because of some other changes we make in the system, some things we shouldn't be going to that we currently do, that quite frankly the police shouldn't go to, we will be going to less of those. And all of those things combined make it more units readily available at any one time to respond. So I anticipate in any case an improving situation. We continue to look at where the footprint of where our resources are. And indeed, teams such as our rural team, you will know is now up to strength. There are no vacancies in that team. That's not obviously the only team that responds to rural crimes, but to have a dedicated team for those areas fully up to strength is important. We already do draw on cross-border resources because we're collaborated with Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire, and therefore from a roads police inspective and armed policing perspective, dog units, they will be on a channel where they will if it's a serious crime, they will be able to instantly go to that. But in terms of calling on other forces outside of that arrangement, we generally would only do that when it's a really serious incident that we'll need additional resources for. It doesn't, often we work really collaboratively cross-border because we might follow, a vehicle out of our force area to another.
So you won't just suddenly stop because you're going across the border,
No,
or they would not suddenly stop because they're coming across the border of Thames Valley Policing Area.
No, we communicate with the powers don't end there at the county line. If you're a police officer in this country, then you are able to use your powers, wherever that may be. Albeit, once we go into other force areas, that's where the communication starts to be, via control rooms and channels we have. So, generally, you should be getting officers from Bedfordshire to respond to things happening in Bedfordshire, but there will be circumstances when we get them from outside. Even the helicopter that we use, we share that with other forces. But what I'm encouraged by is our numbers in community teams, our numbers on our patrol teams, of people who are independent, operational, competent police officers. Because we've discussed before, we've had a lot of students. Those numbers are increasing, and therefore our deployable asset should enable us to have faster response times, even for those people who may see themselves as a bit more remote from some of the deployment hubs.
Do you have any figures of those numbers at the moment for response? If you don't have that, I can get that later on.
What, in terms of numbers of actual officers?
Yes, in response now.
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers for response, but what I could say to you, Festus, is when we spoke in this forum in the summer, there was a point where I had 414 of my officers were students. As of the end of November, 340 of my officers were students, which means, because the numbers are the same in terms of the total headcount, 74 more deployable officers, who are into their final postings now than we had in the summer. I know that by April that will be increased by another 20, and by this time, next year we'll be looking at 114 more than where we were. So that's an improving picture, and many of those officers will be on patrol teams, whereas they might have been on them before, but double crewed or
so you don't really feel the full impact, right? Okay.
Now they're out there on their own, or crewed with a colleague that they themselves might have a student with them.
And I take it this is part of your strategy for being able to meet your commitment to fill uh, to about 95% the establishment for community policing by March next year as well.
Yeah. So we said by the end of January we'd be up to 60 out of the 67 in the hubs. We will do that. We're not there at the moment. I've got 6 more identified as going into community, and I have another 6 identified, and I have an assurance because I suspect you might ask me that we will be at 60 PCs in our community hubs by the end of January, and I've said to you by the end of March we'll be at 95% strength, which is a few more than that.
Yeah.
And then obviously we're looking to increase the number in community overall anyway, and other areas of community that don't get counted in that, such as rural, the rural crime team are fully up to strength.
The 10, yes. So we don't include the 10 that in rural at the moment into community. But obviously we don't include the PCSOs, but that's about 50, I think about 52 or 54. I think we have in because that kind of links to the next question actually about the vacancy rate in the community policing, the number of student officers, and the retention figures as well. So do you want to deal with that one now? Then update on that.
Yeah. So we're below where I want us to be in community, but we'll be at the number we agreed, or I committed to be at by the end of January. So there'll be additional. Got 6 people identified as imminently going into community, and there'll be another 6 identified to take us up to 60. And in terms of PCSOs, we have got a gap. We are about 13 below what we should be, but we need to recruit more PCSOs, and we have a recruitment intake in March, which is coming in, and that will address that gap.
And so are those PCSOs mostly leaving to join as regular police officers, or they're just leaving policing entirely?
We've always seen a flow of PCSOs joining the regulars, but we do occasionally see, individuals leaving to do other things. But they do an important job. What I should have said as well is what we haven't included in there is sergeants. There's 14 out of 14 sergeants in community, so that they're all additional numbers that are doing the effort in community. We're up to its strength in inspectors as well, which is good.
Okay. And so what are the plans to fill those PCSO roles by March next year?
Yeah, so there's an intake due in March, and I'm hoping that intake will have sufficient numbers of PCSOs to fill all the vacancies.
Okay. But how long will it take for them to be fully trained and on the job?
Yeah, I mean, the training process for a PCSO is much shorter than a police officer. So they will have a few weeks in training, but then they'll be deployed into their roles. It takes time for you to get to know your area. They'll be part of a team. They'll be out there training in a few weeks, and we'll be up and running.
So with these 70 odd officers who have now left the student hub, do you know yet where they're all going to be going?
Yeah, so
or they've already gone, sorry.
Yeah, so many of my teams have been either below strength, or maybe we've had students making up the numbers, particularly in patrol. So what you may, in some instances now, the team, say in patrol, might not look much bigger, but the experience of the people in the room is different. And certainly we are, well over our strength in patrol, because we still have a number of students in there. But those 74 will be moving through the organisation, and they generally tend to land in patrol, or some may end up in community, as we've just discussed. But that then enables the release of other people from patrol to investigate. So it's quite a complex one movement from student to substantive constable then allows other people to move into investigation and other specialisms.
Yeah, so what I would like to see is just an idea of where those officers have landed. Even though I don't expect that necessarily means that you're going to have a bigger headcount in that establishment, at least it gives me an idea that those resources have been allowed to go elsewhere into other teams. I don't know where those end up. But I know there's somewhere within the business doing something else, which is really good. But it would just be good to see where so you think most of them end up in response, generally speaking?
Yeah, most of these will end up in patrol because that's often the final posting. But don't forget, some of them will be on the accelerated detective program, and therefore, if they're going into their final posting, they would have been posted into CID or another investigative team,
Right.
which
Okay.
is a really good because again, they are going into a team as and we know investigation is where we've needed more qualified people.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to look at the you've kind of touched on the right care, right person. You want to just briefly touch on the right care, right person, which is going to be taking effect in January?
Yeah. So the first phase is going to be taken place in January, and it is exactly as it says for anyone listening who's not been privy to conversations we might have had in the past. It's about the right care or for the right in the individual circumstances of a person. So often policing is contacted in a situation where the police are not the right agency or professionals to deal with that person's certain circumstances at the time. They often relate to mental health or needing other support, maybe from local authority, housing, those kinds of things, health sector. This is a big deal for us, and it's not something we've done in isolation. So all of my sort of chief exec level peers across sector in Bedfordshire are aware of this, and I had a personal briefing with them only last week. But on the 31st of January, we are going to be changing the response in our control room to some calls of this nature. To give you a kind of flavour of that, on average, we would have over 1,700 calls a month of a nature that we would describe as concerns for welfare. Of about 550, and this is a real kind of averaging out over the month, so it'll flex, but about 550 of those, so about a third, the police should not be going to, but in most circumstances, we currently do go to them. And I've listened to the calls myself, and those calls have been played to colleagues from other sectors, and the one agreement at the table is that was not for the police. Sometimes the tricky bit is who is it for, but there's a flow pathway, there's an escalation policy. But again, what that means for Bedfordshire Police is often those incidents were quite time consuming. So if we're now not going to those, that means I've got units available. And when you combine that with what we're just saying about more officers to be going to when a crime's happening and you need the police there to either prevent it or to intervene and enforce in those situations. So more people available for what the police and the public expect us to be doing. That will help with all the conversations we've been having, Commissioner, about response times, about crimes, that sometimes we don't have a unit available to go to.
And just to reassure the public that this is not about the police force abrogating its responsibilities to support people who are most vulnerable. So if someone is clearly in danger of killing themselves or causing serious harm to anybody else, the police will still attend that, even if they have a history of mental health difficulties, rather than the police just saying, well, look, we're not going to go, that's a mental health job, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's not a blanket approach. It's based on the individual circumstances, and where there is an immediate threat to life, we will go.
Right. That's very simple, isn't it? That was good. Thank you. Right. the over the last couple of weeks, I've heard both at national and regional uh, speaking engagements, the policing minister constantly reference the use of technology by Bedfordshire Police as a gold standard for British policing. Uh, he's made a lot of noise about the redaction tool. Uh, what is being done to ensure these technologies that are being brought into place are actually delivering on what they are promised to deliver in helping to improve the solve rates for crimes and free up more police officers' times? And what can residents expect to see when can residents expect to see the impact of this freed up capacity within the force?
Yeah, so this is, thanks for asking this question. I'd like to tell residents about it. This is not one big technology that suddenly is, gives us hundreds of people back. This is different technological solutions to what I would describe as pain points for our staff and for, in terms of enabling us to provide the service, which gives us an efficiency here and efficiency there. And the redaction is a really good example, because what that process meant, so before we sent a file off to the CPS, we had to take the personal data out of every single document in that file. And that process took many, many hours of investigators' time. And this was even in instances where we're just asking for advice before someone's been charged, and they might not even then get that charging decision. So a big commitment of time, not what the public expect us to be doing, not what people join the police to do, and actually detracting from investigators being able to arrest suspects, interview them, deal with them, and get outcomes for victims. So that change, whilst it's not a cashable efficiency, that has meant through the use of AI and automation, we've now got software that does it for our officers. It doesn't make the final decision. Our people make the decisions. It just enables them to make that quickly and takes out the laborious process and element of their job. So, it's great for the officers and investigators involved. It's much better for the public, because the reality is you're more likely to get your crime solved and investigated because of the officers have got more time to focus on those things rather than admin. And redaction isn't the only area. So this, we've got different technology being used in our control room. So our chat bot that people communicate with, that 20%, and we think it could do 30% of all conversations we have on that are resolved by the bot before it transfers you to a person, and it can talk to as many people as it needs to at the same time.
And how all this affecting demand in the force control room now, having all these technologies in place?
Yeah, so we've got more to do in the control room, but that has certainly taken speeded us up and created an efficiency in that area. And very much we intend to, introduce other technologies into the control room to help. So at the moment, we have had to increase more resource because the demand in there is very high. Our performance has increased, but to sustain an increase in performance, we need to continue to introduce other technologies, including a kind of self-serve element if you want updates on your crimes, or you're trying to leave a message for an officer, and those sorts of things, which we're going to introduce. So I do see this as really important to a force that operates with fine margins. The conservative estimate of the redaction tool is it's the equivalent of having 6 extra detectives for each year.
Wow,
which is a lot.
that is a lot.
Yeah.
I think it would just be interesting, once we've had this in place for about a year, to see the impact it is having on solve rates, closure rates for crime, the average length of time it takes to get a case to a charge now. I think that'll be really interesting to see 12 months from where we are now.
Much of the stuff we've just spoken about is at that kind of internal end of making us more efficient. Obviously, there are other technologies such as proactive facial recognition, etc., that we will be looking to utilize, and those things will have a direct impact on the ability for us to detect crime. But we will do those changes. We'll have further conversations, Commissioner, at the point where we think we have something we think works for us and is right to implement.
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, I mean, one of our first conversations, before you became the chief constable, was me asking what was your appetite for taking a risk with technology, and you've more than surpassed expectations in that, and I think, and it's all credit to you and to your team for being willing to actually look at what is out there, having seen the pressure points for your officers and your teams. Look, what innovation can we bring in to deal with that in a safe and effective way to allow them to be able to do their jobs better in delivering for the public, rather than just being a big fan of gadgets and gizmos. This is about pragmatic and practical solutions to very, very pressing problems in policing. So I really do sincerely commend you for being focused on that amongst all the other different areas of pressure that you have. And so, like I said, in 12 months time, it will be good to see how the totality of all this innovation and investment in time and resources is actually delivering for residents, which I'm confident it will do. I just have two more questions I want to ask you. One is around speeding, antisocial behavior, burglaries, retail crime. A lot of the neighborhood crimes, which residents mostly raise with me. So while I appreciate that they're very serious, sexy crimes, as they're called, the stabbings, the shootings, and all those things that people are very, very unlikely to ever experience, are priorities because of the level of harm that they create. Um, I'm just interested to know what plans you have in place to deal with this, including retail crime, and the national scourge of assaults on retail workers is an absolute disgrace. And I don't think anyone should be going to work expecting to be assaulted. I recently went to a couple of stores where I was shown videos of literally people coming in with IKEA bags and just emptying shelves into these bags. They were being filmed on a body one video camera in in this supermarket, and they just walked out. Uh, I've seen cases of retail workers being punched, being assaulted, being threatened, even though the threat didn't materialize. I mean, that should not be happening. Um, what plans do you have in place for one is just reassure the public that these are still important areas of policing business, and apart from the conviction side, which is the court issue, that's a separate matter. This is something that the force takes. These neighborhood crimes are very, very important for you as chief constable.
Well, firstly, they are important for me. The things you just said that you'd seen, you're concerned about. I am, and I expect the police to be doing something about those, first and foremost. So if I break, you included a number of different things in there. So
Yes.
maybe in terms of hotspots for crime and antisocial behaviour, which can sometimes be different, but often are the same, place-based issues. Included in that, announcement about a settlement was, the funding for those things. So that is a good thing. So that enables us to continue to support hotspot policing, and we are one of the evidence-based forces for how effective that is at, having people at the right time and places being visible. So we will continue to do that, and obviously we'll seek with the resources I spoke about to be, doing that on a more, even more effectively than we currently are doing. You focused there quite a bit on the retail crime. So, our position is, my view is, I have a specialist capability to help solve that, which is our neighbouring policing teams. Hence, we're putting more people into those, as we described earlier on this call, and therefore we've got greater capacity to respond to those. I do want us to be responding to the situations that you just described. So offenders, present, been detained, there's been violence, someone's been assaulted, there should be a response to those. But I also want us to work really effectively as a police force, but also with the sector to look at prolific offenders, what are the top places where if we focus our efforts on those individuals and those places, we're likely to have a bigger impact on this crime. Because we know actually that although the crime type's very prevalent, it's actually quite a number of people who are, prolific offenders, and therefore we need to tackle that. So that kind of the new national strategy and prioritization for tackling retail crime, I fully support, and that's what we should be doing. And as we get often, whenever anything comes into our control room, we have to go through what we call the Thrive, but it's a risk, threat, and harm kind of assessment of what's going on in that particular call versus with everything else that's going on at that moment and what resources we have available. We've been talking earlier about having more available and having more, our community teams having better numbers. So therefore, consequently, I expect us to be better at dealing with this. And so that's certainly the push I'm having with my teams. Burglary, we're already a high performing force in terms of burglary, and that this isn't a do something else instead. I expect that to be maintained. So those crimes that matter to residents, we are going to be putting more effort into. And indeed, all these things link together, because particularly where you've got first time offenders, we can start bringing more people through the system for this, then the diversionary pathway in some instances might really help with this. I think you mentioned speeding as well when you spoke. So, in terms of speeding, I know that is a concern of many of our councillors and residents. It's frequently raised with me, and this is a joint effort between the local authority, the local councillors, the community. There's lots we can do with Speed Watch. So that is, our community teams are focusing on areas where we see the biggest risk, and then on our more, our main roads, where there's a death or a risk of serious injury, we know because of what's already happened at those locations. We have the kind of more, the camera-based enforcement mobile units that we continue to have. So there's going to be no reduction there. One of the things I'm personally keen to do is I'm keen to increase our special constabulary, and I'd like to give them more equipment because they've got all the powers of a police officer, and so we're going to be getting some more equipment to enable the special constabulary to support our community teams, so we can be visible at more locations at particular times, addressing those concerns. So that's something else that we will be doing to tackle.
So we are going to have in effect a dedicated roads policing special constabulary team. Maybe that over egging it a little bit.
Yeah, it's not a roads policing team. As it happens, we do have some specials who work with our roads policing teams. They're fully trained with advanced drivers who could deal with all the stuff that roads policing do. And I was speaking to one of those the other day who's been doing that for years, highly experienced. But this is more about working alongside local community teams in our towns and villages to tackle some of the hotspots.
Okay, that's very well. I look forward to that landing. Yeah, and as you know, I have a soft spot for specials anyway. I wonder why, but
what I would say is they will only be there at certain times, whereas the kind of physical speed bumps and all those things, they're there day in, day night, and that there is a big part of this in a cross-sector solution to this issue.
So in other words, this is you saying the local authority need to do their bit.
We all need to do
it. Very diplomatically put. I have one final question, plus a slightly cheeky question to ask you. Don't worry, it's fine. So a resident wants to know what Bedfordshire Police's policy is on collecting declared sex at birth of someone in custody. Does the force only go with the person's declared gender, or both? So sex at birth on their birth certificate, or the gender that they declare themselves as. Obviously, this is born out of concerns that this potentially could skew crime data in terms of gender, whether it's male perpetrated or female perpetrated, and also in the case where, for example, someone comes to custody saying that they are female, but they still have male genitalia, and they insist on being searched by a female officer before they're detained. What is the force's policy on this?
Yeah, so essentially, we ask a person to declare their gender, but we also, our custody staff also indicate what they believe the gender to be.
Okay.
You know, what you've just said is, you know, we're not seeing issues of this nature as it being problematic, but we will always, you know, use a person if there needs to be any kind of situation where maybe there's a search and therefore you want someone of the same sex. You know, if there's a blatant discrepancy between what the person's saying and what we believe, then we will do what we think is most appropriate in the circumstances. What I would say is our custody facility, you know, facilities, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what gender someone's in, whilst it's, you know, a cell block. Effectively, these are en-suite facilities that give an individual the dignity and privacy that they need, regardless of their sex. But, you know, whoever's asking this question, you know, I can foresee why you need to have a policy and you need to know the answer to that. But this is not a real issue. It's not an issue that is, you know, we've encountered any difficulties with to date. But we do have that process in place for that reason.
Okay, I think that will provide an element of reassurance for the lady who wrote in with this question. And the last one I was going to ask you, Chief, is this: Bedford Blues or Anthill Town? Who are you backing?
I think it's not about who you're backing. I support both of Bedfordshire's, you know, team. But I think on form, it's looking like the Blues on form, I would say.
Right.
Can I also say, you know, a shout out to Tom, the captain of Luton, who was obviously taken over the weekend, and the thoughts are with him, the family, and the club, because that was a very difficult day for the club.
Yeah, and just to see the response from I think it was Bournemouth that we're playing, and you know, being very magnanimous. It was quite a bit of a shock to see him collapsing on the pitch again, and our best wishes to him and his family and the football club as well. And on that note, Chief, I wish you a very good Christmas, you and your family, and want to thank you for your leadership in steering the ship of this force over a very, you know, interesting and challenging year in terms of demand and some of the things that we had to go through during the summer months. And thank you for all that and bringing the community together along with the force. And I think many forces could do well to learn from the way you are choosing to engage with all of our communities. So thank you very much for that. And till we meet again at the Anthill Town football rugby ground on Saturday. Thank you very much.
Hopefully see you there. And a Merry Christmas to anyone who's watching this. I'm sure many thousands will be. So
it's a bit more than that actually. But yeah, wish you all a Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Bye bye.